Today's lecture is Dr. Claudio Feliciani from the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology, or RCAST, at the University of Tokyo. He is engaged in crowd management research as a project associate professor. Originally from Switzerland, he has research experience in both Switzerland and Japan for various fields, and also has experience working in a Japanese company. His academic research interests are very diverse. One of his research themes is pedestrian dynamics. It's an important theme for crowded cities like Tokyo. Today, we will hear about his career, his research process, and discuss possible options for a sustainable and inclusive society. Dr. Claudio?
Thank you, Rachel, for the nice introduction. It's an honor and I'm happy to be here. And so from here now, I will talk about what you've been very kindly introducing about. So the title of my class or my lecture today, it's about, as you said, about crowd dynamics. And in specifics, I want to talk as I moved from topics close to physics to something more close to human science, like cognitive science, psychology, or animal behavior.
Okay.
So this is the topics of my presentation today. First of all, I will have a very short self-introduction. Then I will focus on my research topic and the motivation and why it is important for Tokyo and for our society. And then I will go more detail about my research, talking about how we can measure and understand the way people move. And later I will also give some ideas on how we can manage to control crowds, so to give information to have them moving more efficiently. And in the last part of the presentation I will talk about what I'm doing now, which is a little bit different to physics, which is my background, or like pedestrian dynamics. And I will conclude by giving some advices to students like you that are just in the early stages of choosing what they want to do in the future. So first of all, my self-introduction. As Rachel said, I was born in Switzerland. Maybe you know what is Switzerland in Europe. It's about in the middle. Actually, I was born very close to Italy, so my mother tongue is Italian. But since it's a very small region, it's only 5% of Switzerland of population, there are not so many universities, so I had to move to the German area, which is in the north of Switzerland, to study, and there I studied mechanical engineering during my bachelor.
All right.
Later, I decided that I wanted to do something more close to physics, and because there is nuclear engineering, which is something between physics and engineering, I decided to take the path of nuclear engineering during my master.
All right.
And after that, I went to Japan, and I was working. Okay, you can guess the company from the cap and the name. So I've been working for about 1 year as an intern in a Japanese company, and later I had the opportunity to keep working for that company as a regular employee.
All right.
And that was, at that time I was in Kansai. I was in the area of Osaka, and I've been doing that work for about 3 years.
Okay.
After that, I felt that, okay, I was doing research in a industry, in a company, but I wanted to do more like real research, more deep research. So I decided to quit my job and to move to the University of Tokyo, where I'm now, to do my PhD and to do this research on pedestrian dynamics. So I did my PhD, and then after that, I've been working in the same institution where I'm now, RCAST, in the field of crowd management and pedestrian dynamics. So here is a short slide on what I've been doing before coming to Tokyo University. Of course, it's very complex, so probably you don't understand anything. But so what I want to say is that I've been doing very different topics. So as a bachelor, I've been studying the jet flow, like in engines of the airplanes.
Okay.
Later in nuclear engineering, I've been studying the mixture of different gases in nuclear reactors.
All right.
And when I was working in the company, I was studying the motion of plastics, resins.
Oh, I see.
So they look very different like topics, but if you look, all of them, they have a common point, which is something moving. So the motion of some fluids, which can be gas,
Yeah.
can be plastic, can be any kind of fluid. So I've always had this kind of interest about moving things, or fluid dynamics, or such kind of things. But when I was young, I also had always interested about philosophy, about social science. So I decided that also because of the Fukushima accident, in which I understand that technology has some effect on the society, and you cannot just develop some technology because it's good. You also need to understand how that is taken from the society. So you have to have an understanding of both science and society to make something which is useful for every one of us. And since I was in Japan, I noticed that not only particles move, or like water or whatever, even people,
Yes.
they can be like a fluid.
Yes.
So if you're in Japan, probably you can see people going out from the train. So they move like some water coming out from like a river. So.
Okay.
And so I started to be interested in studying the way people move. This like a kind of motion of crowds, of big crowds.
All right.
And what I found out is actually there is already a discipline which is studying this kind of phenomena, which is called pedestrian dynamics. And so I decided to focus on this one for my future research.
I see.
So from now on, I will talk more in detail about this pedestrian dynamics, and also focusing, especially first of all, to say why is it important and what was my motivation in choosing this topic, except what I've been talking so far.
Right.
So I think being in Tokyo, so you know that there are a lot of people, but even in places like in Germany or any country, so even in not crowded places, if you have an event like a music festival, you can have a lot of people coming to a common place.
Of course.
So we need to understand how people move. And so far, the organization of big events has always been done on previous experience. So there is not really a science to study, to understand how people move, to measure, to quantify.
Okay.
So there is now such kind of research which is trying to find out the mechanism which drive people to move in a big group. And from now on, I will give some very little background about how we measure crowds, about this pedestrian dynamics, about this crowd science. And so the first information that we usually use to estimate crowds is density. So how many people are in a square meter? That is very simple. So usually in normal places the density is very low. We say about 0.1 people per square meter. In the train in the morning, where you have a lot of people, it can be between 4 to 6 people per square meters.
Okay.
And in the case of accidents, the density can be as much as 10 people per square meter. So maybe the idea is not very difficult to, it's not very easy to get, but it's really a lot of people.
Okay.
So that is an important information to understand the safety. So the more people, the more dangerous.
I see.
Another information that we usually use is the flow. So for example, if you have a corridor, we can measure how many people pass through the corridor in 10 seconds, or usually we take 1 second. That is the flow. So it can be the same as used for the fluids. So the flow of water in a river. So it's very similar, but just we measure that in people per meter per second.
So it's not just the amount of people, the density, but also the speed and how they move.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
You're very right. So, and for example, if you take the video I've been showing before, so we had a time of 10 seconds, and in that case the width was 3 meters. So we can do an easy calculation, and so we had 54 people in 3 meters in 10 seconds, so that make a flow of about 1.8 people per meter per second.
Okay.
That, as you said, so usually density and speed are related with flow. So there is this fundamental equation that is used to study pedestrian dynamics. So that is probably the most difficult concept I will talk about it. I'm not going much further into the details.
Thank you.
And usually, so how the most simple way to study traffic, to understand if a place is congested or not, is to do this kind of simple experiments. You can have people working in a circle, and you measure, as I said, so the density, so how many people you have inside this circle, and the flow, so how many people pass through a line in a given time.
Oh, okay.
And what is very interesting is if you plot the density on the horizontal axis and the flow on the vertical axis, you can see that, of course, the more people you have, the higher is the flow. So you can take also car is the same. So if you take the highway in the morning, you have very little cars, they can move very fast, so the flow is very low.
Okay.
Then as the traffic tends to be a little bit higher, you have more car, the speed is still the same because it's not congested, and the flow increases.
Okay.
But at a certain point, the more car you have, they have to slow down,
Yeah.
because they're not able to keep the distance. So at that time, you can see that if you keep plotting the density and the flow, it's not increasing, it's starting to, to stop.
Okay.
And after that, the flow will decrease. That is when you're stuck in the highway, you're moving at a very low speed, and you have a lot of cars. And in the worst case, everyone is stuck, so you're just stopped, you're not moving at all. So to define what is the maximum density that we can have, to define the congestion, we usually try to figure out the moment in which this kind of graph starts decreasing.
Find that maximum point, or I guess finding that point where the amount of people or objects causes a decrease in flow.
Exactly, perfect, yes.
Right.
So that is what we define as congestion. So you have to make sure that your density or your amount of people or cars or bicycle has to be always lower than that limit.
Okay, got it.
And that is very interesting because there have been other researchers that have been trying to compare like cars, bicycle and people, and it doesn't matter which particle, whatever you use, the amount is always the same. You have this kind of increase, then there is the maximum, and then it decreases.
Okay, so they all follow that same curve.
Exactly, yes. You're right.
Thank you.
So what I've been doing in the beginning of my research, or most of the time, has been studying the so-called bidirectional flow. So the name sounds very complex, but it's something very easy. It's just people working in two directions. What you have in a corridor, very commonly.
Yes.
And what you always see is that people, they make some sort of lanes. So you try always to follow someone working in the same direction, as it can be seen very easily in the video. So that is very simple. It's very trivial somehow, but there is many things that are not understood. For example, so when people make lanes and when people do not make lanes. So sometimes people, they very nicely make lanes, they pass through each other, and sometimes they get stuck. So they're not able to go to the other direction, or they have to kind of arrange themselves.
Instead of one person moving to the opposite side, both people end up moving to the same side, back and forth, until finally they pause and one person moves and maybe the other person has stopped.
Yes.
Completely.
So we're trying to find, okay, should I move right? No, he's moving right.
Yes.
So, and then in that case, people may get stuck. That is very commonly the case.
Okay.
So it's very simple, but still, there are many small aspects which are still not very good to understand.
Yes.
And okay, something that I was a little bit asking myself from the beginning of my research. So let's assume the case we have now. So the case you have in the top and the case you have in the bottom. So in both cases you have 20 people.
Yes.
So the number of people is the same, the surface is the same, so the density is the same. But in one case you have 18 people from one side and 2 people from the other side.
Yes.
In the other case you have 10 people against 10 people, so the same amount. So which case do you think will more likely get congested? So in which case people are more likely to get confused or to not be able to arrange themselves?
I want to say the 2 people and the 18 people, I think, will have that problem where you'll get stuck and it'll get a little bit congested. Just because with the 10 people, if one or two people get together, maybe they're traveling together, they can form that line or that lane. And then the others might follow behind them, even if they're not familiar with each other or unrelated. But with the two people, if they're not related, they could go entirely different paths, and then there's no lane, like you said.
Yes, I think so. I think there are good reasons to find one answer or the other.
Okay.
Also, I didn't really know, so I could find some good reason to say the one above is the worst one in some case. I also had some other reason, like if you have many people, it's difficult for both of them to understand how to move. So
yeah,
I didn't know, so I decided to do some experiments to get some students and to get some data to really find out which case is the more congested and what are the differences. So we did some very simple experiments. In all the situations you have in all the cases you have 54 people,
okay.
But in every situation you have a different amount of people from one direction and the other.
All right.
So you can see that, for example, in the case with all the people with yellow cat, they are just working one direction.
Okay.
And in the video below on the right, that is the case with the same amount of people in both directions.
Okay.
And then you have two situations in the middle, so kind of a lot of people and against not so many people. So the first thing that I tried to check was the speed of the different configurations.
Okay.
But I was very disappointed when I looked at the results, because the speed was basically the same in all the cases. So if you check the speed and also if you check the error for each case, they're all the same. So there is no statistical difference. So I checked the video again and again to try to understand. I could see some differences, like in the way people moved in the lanes, but still the speed was the same. So I tried to understand why I could not see such a difference. And what I noticed is that people just, at the beginning, just work straight. And after they start getting close to each other, at this moment, they start making lanes. And once they make lanes, then they just keep following the people in front of them. So once you have the lanes, they're very stable. So you just have to follow the person in front of you. And after that, people will just move in different directions, left and right. And the lanes, they get dissolved. And at the end, they just keep working in the same direction. And when I was looking at the video, I noticed that especially when people work in the same direction, you can see some very linear motion. So it's very stable, people just move straight. But when you start to have people moving in different directions, they start to mix and they start to move around left and right. And if you look at some video taken at very extreme conditions, you can actually see that people move kind of around. And since I was doing the fluid dynamics before, I noticed that that kind of behavior is very similar to weather or flow. So if you look at the weather during a nice day, you have some very straight clouds, very nice, beautiful weather and stuff. When the weather starts to be more unstable, the clouds tend to be wavy. And in the worst case, you have some tornado, you have some typhoon, so the motion of the air is completely circular. Okay. So it's moved around some center. And I noticed that there was this kind of similarity between the way people move and weather. So I said, okay, maybe I can use the same principles that are used in fluid dynamics, especially the rotation, to study the way people move. So I analyzed my experiment again by taking these different phases I've been talking before. So people working straight, making lanes, moving in the lanes, and then dissipation of the lanes and moving straight again. Okay. And this time I've been trying to measure the amount of rotation inside the ground. Okay. Assuming, as it is the case of the weather, that the more rotation you have, the more the weather is unstable. So probably in the case of people, the more rotation there is in the way they move, the more congested is their motion.
All right.
And what I notice is that at the beginning, when people move straight, the rotation is very low.
Okay.
And in fact, you don't have congestion in other cases. And when people make delays in the second phase, you can see that in all the cases you have a lot of rotation. In that case, it's kind of congested.
Okay.
But what is interesting is that if you check the case after making delays, you can see that when there is the same amount of people in both directions, the rotation, so the stability is very good.
Okay.
Is very high. So that means that in the case in which you have the same amount of people in both directions, it's very difficult to make lanes because you have both groups, they have to arrange themselves, move left and right. But once you have the lanes, they tend to be very stable.
Okay.
While in the case that you have a lot of people against few people, for the big number of people it's very easy to move because they don't have to arrange left and right. But you will never have lanes. So it's not going to be stable after even after a long time.
Okay.
So both cases are a little bit different. So it's very difficult to say which one is better or which one is worse. But so the difference was that once you have lanes, in the case, the same amount of people, it tends to be more stable.
Okay.
And so after doing these kind of experiments, a colleague joined my group, and he has been also interested in my experiments, and he also compared the behavior of people to the behavior of animals.
Okay.
And he found some interesting aspects. For example, he noticed that the way people try to make lanes is very similar to the way animals are looking for food. So I don't know if that is related or not, but it could be that it's some kind of behavior that we have because we are some animals. So we try to optimize the way we move around in the same way animals try to optimize their motion to look for food.
Okay.
And also we have been repeating the experiments with people working by looking at the smartphone. And what was very interesting is that we found out that when we had people working at using the smartphone, it took more time to make lanes.
I'm not surprised.
It was more difficult to make lanes. So
yeah.
So that was some kind of like a trivial experiment, but it means that there is some kind of mutual understanding between people when they work.
Okay.
So you try to understand how the other move in the same time. The other people try to understand where you move.
Okay.
So it's not a person trying to understand other movement, but it has to be mutual.
Yes.
And when you look at the smartphone, so the other people can avoid you, but you're not sending messages on where you want to move.
There's no communication,
Exactly.
whether it be by body language or eye contact. With a phone, we don't have that method of communicating.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay, so until now I've been talking about method to quantify congestion, but still, even if we know that a place is congested and where is congested at what time, still we have to solve this issue to prevent it from happening. So what is usually done is to give some information to the people to avoid all coming at the same time, or to give different routes, like in the case of car navigation.
Yes.
And so in the case of people, usually, again, as for car, you give information. So usually some kind of announcement. You can have some fence in the middle of the corridor to keep people working in different directions. And of course, if the situation gets more serious, then you may have to call the police and maybe even the army. But okay, I'm not talking about this kind of situation. So in the normal cases, when you have not so many people, so how can you make them move a little bit more efficient?
Okay.
And so what we did is to an experiment to understand. So usually, of course, you try to communicate to all the people what they should do, or like to give information to as more people as you can. But usually not all the people follow the education. So if you cannot talk to all the people, so which kind of individuals are the ones that are more important to have an overall effect on the population?
Okay, so who should you prioritize sharing that information with?
Exactly.
Right, you can't talk to everyone, so who should you make sure to talk to?
Yes.
Got it.
You perfectly got the point. So we organized an experiment like the one I'm showing here. So we had a room with 4 exits, but there was a curtain in each exit. So people from inside the room, they were not able to see outside.
Okay.
And behind the curtain, every exit was different.
Okay.
So one exit was narrow,
All right.
one exit was large,
Okay.
in one exit there was a step.
Okay.
So people with wheelchair, they cannot pass through this kind of exit.
Yes.
And one exit had some kind of slope.
Okay.
So people with wheelchair, they have problems to go through the slope.
Yes.
And we also give some kind of map to the participants. So we give some map showing the configuration of the exit for each experiment.
Okay.
And we checked 3 different conditions. We had able-bodied participants, so people just walking normally, and people on wheelchair.
Okay.
In one case, we gave information to everyone.
Okay.
So everyone checking on the map was able to know the exit even if they could not see behind the curtain.
All right.
Then in one case, we just gave the information to the people on wheelchair.
Okay.
So able-bodied people could not know which kind of exit was behind the curtain, but people on wheelchair could.
Okay.
And in one case, we informed everyone.
Okay.
So everyone was able to check the map and be able to understand the configuration. This is just a video of the experiments. In this case, the people in wheelchair that you can see with the red cap, they can know the location of the exit. So we just gave the start, and then people were moving from the different exits.
Okay.
And so what we did is to measure the time it took to evacuate from the room. And so as you can guess, in the case everyone has the information was much faster than in the case nobody had the information.
Yes.
And it was about 22% faster when everyone had the information on the exit.
That's quite different.
But what is quite interesting is that when only the 3 people in wheelchair had this information on the exit, it was already 18% faster.
Okay, so that's not much of a difference. Even
No.
if only 3 people knew the information, it was already so much faster than nobody with the information.
Yes. So that means that, of course, trying to give the information to everyone is important.
Yeah.
But since not all the people are always following the information, if you prioritize the people that have some difficulties or like some kind of handicap,
Yes.
it can be more efficient. It can be useful for them, of course, but it's also very useful for everyone. So that is kind of like win-win strategy to have people moving more efficiently.
Yes.
Okay, so from here I've been talking about the crowd research, but so recently I've been interested in trying to understand how we can change also the environment to influence the way people move.
Okay.
So that is very difficult to be done on humans because we are influenced by a lot of things in our environment. So recently I've been working a little bit with animals, especially with crabs.
Okay.
There are some special crabs in Okinawa that move in this kind of like a swarm. So it's very similar to human crowds, but it's much easier to do the experiment with crabs because so you can get a lot of them, you don't have to pay them.
Yes.
And also they show some very trivial behavior. And what I've been trying to do is to see if we can try to drive them to move in one direction by turning the light.
Oh, okay, so influence them with the light, change their behavior.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, to conclude the presentation, this is my last slide in which I'm going to give some messages to you based on my background. So the first message is about, so as you know, I've been moving between mechanical engineering, nuclear engineering, and social science, so different fields.
Yes.
So if somebody asks me what is my major, what is my field, I cannot really answer.
Okay.
And I think that is going to be the more and more the case. So maybe now you're struggling, so should I study physics, should I study social science, should I study psychology? I think it's not that much important because it's usually possible to move a little bit from one field to the other if you have the interest and if you have the motivation to do that. So just choose whatever you like, and I'm pretty sure you will be able to change it later. So there is not so much important to be stuck in categories. Also, the second message I want to say, so in my case I've been starting from something very like uncommon to most of the people, like the bidirectional field. It's something very small that only like researchers are interested about. And I've been doing that, I've been focusing on something very small, very specific, but it turned out that I was able to quantify crowds, which is something that is now used in different approaches. So you don't have to ask yourself if what you're doing is important to the society, is important to the people or not. So if you focus on something and you keep studying that, you keep asking yourself why is that happening, why is the society changing this way, why the animal they behaving this way. If you keep asking yourself why, it doesn't matter what you do, one day what you're doing, it will be useful somehow. So I think there is no necessity to keep asking yourself, is it useful or not? So just try to focus on something that you like, that you're good at, and stick on that. Maybe change what you are doing little by little, and just move by following your heart. I mean, I think that's one of my messages. And just to conclude, so I've been saying that like one of my motivations to study more about society was the nuclear accident in Fukushima. Also, when I was a student in the university, I'd been struggling with depression. And maybe not many people know about what is that about. So people think that people that are depressed are just people that are like sad, which is not the case. Is that one day you wake up and you are not able to stay alone. You get scared if you don't have friends around. You're not hungry, you're not sleeping anymore. You don't know why. So in my case, I was born in a very happy family. I had a lot of friends, I was good at school, I had a beautiful girlfriend. So I was not able to stay alone all the time. So I couldn't understand why. And the more time I spent thinking about that, the worse I got.
Okay.
And so that, of course, after that, people become sad and the people become depressed. So you may think that that is a negative experience, so there is nothing to learn from it. But in my case, it made me reflect on like what is our mind? So what is the world that we see? Is it what we see with our eyes, or like is it with what we feel with our heart? So how do we relate with the world? And also in my case, I try to understand, so am I wrong? Or maybe like the place where I'm looking is, where I'm living is weird. So who is weird and why?
Yes.
So I think like this kind of failure, like this kind of bad experience that you may have, if you try to understand why that is happening, if you try to understand more deeper inside you and in the world you're living, it can be turned out in something very useful, which in my case was the motivation to move toward social science.
Okay. All right, Dr. Claudio, I have some questions for you. I'm guessing that congestion control or management might be a popular research field because the results can be used by many people or institutions. In popular research areas such as yours, how do you find unique viewpoints or create original research questions?
Okay, thank you for your question. Well, first of all, I have to say that I'm very lucky because I'm in a research field which is original by itself. So I maybe don't have to look so much into originality because it's already something new. But in my case, what I'm trying to find out to make it more original is to find the connection between different areas. So like I've been saying, so physics, cognition, psychology, environment. So I think there are many people that are studying, even crowds, from a very specific point. So people which had the background on physics, they just want to focus on numbers. People who had a background on psychology, they want to focus on like mass behavior. And usually people, they don't talk too much to each other. So what I'm trying to do, and maybe what is my original point, is to try to find the connections between these different areas.
Okay, so you're not staying focused in one area, but you're finding unique viewpoints by adding different areas of interest as well.
Yes.
All right. It's very interesting that research has found similarities between phenomenon in nature or animals and in congestion. Do you think the approach of finding solutions in nature or in non-human beings to manage issues in human society will be more popular from now on?
Yes, I think so. So something that I also said from the beginning, so as a nuclear engineer, I felt that there was some kind of a gap between people just developing technology, and the society and the way we perceive this kind of technology. So we also need to understand that what we developed should be part of the nature, so that we are already part of the nature.
Okay.
So I think it's important to understand the nature because we are part of it. So I think both, they have always be considered, even when developing some kind of technology which may only use for some other technical aspect.
Okay. When we take a similar approach to the one mentioned in your presentation, creating a research path based on our own interests, asking that question, why? What should we be mindful of?
Good question. So I think, of course, it's important to ask yourself why, but of course, you don't have to ask why for everything. So if a painting is beautiful, if a flower is beautiful, it's beautiful. So you may ask why, for example, if you're an artist, but you don't have to ask yourself why for everything. So, but if you think like that there is some problem, so there is something that you feel it's not working well. So if you think, okay, this is problematic, then I think at that point it's important to ask yourself why. Why is that happening? Why is the environment getting worse? So that is something that will help us to move in the right direction. So I think it's important to ask yourself why when there is a problem, when you feel a problem.
Got it, thank you. And then your experiences also show that it's possible to change fields of interest. You talked about mechanical engineering and nuclear engineering. However, that can be kind of scary to some people, like making changes to their interests or their fields. What advice would you give to students who are concerned about the decision to make changes?
I think, yes, it's very scary, and also it's not a good idea to completely jump to a new field.
Okay.
So that is also something that I've not been doing. So when I moved, for example, from mechanical engineering to nuclear engineering, there are two different fields, but still they are very related. Then I've been moving to crowds, but at first I checked crowds from a physical point of view.
Okay.
So I've been studying physics when I was in nuclear engineering, because there is a lot of physics in it. I've been taking my knowledge I had in a new field. So I think it's very important to keep a step on your field in which you have a lot of knowledge, which you're kind of an expert.
Yes.
By moving the next step, by moving the next field to the new field. So jumping from one field to the other is not a good idea, and it's very scary, and I think it's not going to work.
Of course.
So move little by little toward your dream or toward the destination where you're aiming at.
Today we followed the career path of Dr. Claudio, and we learned that, again, the path of research is flexible. Like he said, maybe your interests might not help someone today, but it will help someone in the future. So let's follow our interests and see where they lead. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.